Welcome back, everybody. We're diving deep today into family law. Three child custody cases, actually.
Oh,
Yeah, from across Canada. We've got Manitoba,
okay.
New Brunswick, and Ontario. And these cases, they give us a look into these incredibly difficult decisions that judges have to make when they're trying to figure out what is actually best for a child.
Yeah.
And believe me, these stories are anything but straightforward.
You know what's really interesting about these cases? It's that
Right.
everyone is so unique, but they all have these common threads.
Oh, like what?
You see the impact of the parent's behavior, obviously,
Yeah.
and then the legal frameworks that surround custody and just that constant struggle to figure out, a child's well-being. It's like a real-life puzzle, and the stakes are incredibly high.
Wow. Okay, let's jump into it with our first case.
Sounds good.
Hose v. Hose
Hose v. hose.
from Manitoba. So on the surface,
Okay.
it seems like a normal divorce case, a couple fighting over custody of their two kids. But there's a twist. The father is like obsessively concerned about mold in their house.
Interesting. Yes, and that fixation, even though there's evidence that suggests that it's not a big deal, it becomes a major problem in this case. And it's interesting because this kind of behavior can sometimes signal a larger pattern of control.
Oh, okay.
It's like the judge has to figure out, is this genuine concern or is this some tactic to kind of manipulate the situation? It's subtle, but it's important.
So it's not just about, is the mold actually a problem, but how the father's acting around the mold thing is affecting the family?
Exactly. And in this case, the judge decided to really limit the father's parenting time because they were concerned about his behavior. It was escalating and it was abusive, and he was dragging the children into all of this conflict.
Wow.
And so it seems like the judge felt that giving sole custody to the mother was really the best way to protect the children from emotional harm.
Yeah, that's a hard decision to make.
It is.
It really shows how judges have to look beyond the surface and think about, long-term consequences of what a parent is doing.
Absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
these cases really show that a child's well-being is the most important thing. And sometimes that means making tough choices to limit a parent's involvement.
For sure. And speaking of tough choices,
Okay.
our next case,
All right.
KWVKT from New Brunswick.
Okay.
This one takes us into some pretty sensitive territory.
Okay.
So this case, it involves a separated couple with three young boys, twins, and a younger brother. And the mother, she makes a serious allegation
Oh.
that the father used access to the twins as leverage to get sexual favors after they separated.
Wow. That is a sensitive issue. And that requires, a really close look at all the evidence. The judge has to think about, the burden of proof, meaning like they need to be convinced that the allegation is more likely true than not.
Right.
And they look at different things. Witness statements, if there is any physical evidence, and just the overall, credibility of the people involved. It can be a really complex and emotionally charged process.
So how did the judge deal with this particular case?
Well, they look at every aspect of the case very carefully, from both parents' capabilities, their living arrangements, their support systems. It was very meticulous. And ultimately, they gave primary care of the twins to the father,
Wow.
citing that he had a stable home and he had these routines established, for the kids, and the children had a very strong bond with his family.
So even with that allegation, the judge still gave custody to the father.
It's really important to remember that judges have to look at all the evidence. And in this case, the judge clearly felt that despite the allegation that was made, the father was offering a more stable and beneficial environment for the children.
Yeah.
It's also important to say that separating siblings, especially twins,
Right.
is not something that judges take lightly.
I can imagine. It seems like the judge was really trying to find, the best solution,
They were.
even if it meant making a really tough call to separate the brothers.
It does, and it shows that there's no one-size-fits-all answer in family law. Every case is different. It has its own complexities, and judges have to consider so many things when they're making these really important decisions that affect people's lives.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, get ready because our final case goes deep into parental alienation.
Oh, boy.
This one is called Ginese v. Fadel from Ontario. It involves 4 children who have totally rejected their mother.
Wow.
And here's the hard part. The judge found that the father was using severe parental alienation tactics.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So parental alienation, it's complex.
It is.
It's devastating.
Yeah.
And it happens when one parent is manipulating the child into rejecting the other parent for no good reason. And courts are recognizing more and more that this can cause serious psychological harm to the children. So it's not just that a kid prefers one parent over the other. It's like
Right.
a whole pattern of behavior to
Yeah.
ruin that relationship.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And in this case, the judge pointed out many instances of the father's manipulation and controlling behavior. There were false accusations against the mother, emotional abuse, and even times where the father used the children's fear to stay in control. And the judge actually used the term coercive control to describe what he was doing, which is a whole pattern of behaviors meant to dominate and isolate the other person.
It's so sad. It's like he was trying to erase the mom from the kids' lives completely.
Yeah.
So how did the judge even start to deal with this mess?
It was a huge task.
Yeah.
The judge had to take what seemed like a genuine rejection of the mother by the children
Right.
and kind of reconcile that with all this evidence of the father's manipulation.
So how do you even start to make a decision in a situation like that?
It's one of the toughest things about family law.
Mhm.
In this case, the judge ended up leaving the younger children with the father.
Yep.
But it wasn't an easy decision. They recognized how harmful the father's actions were. But they were also really worried about what would happen if they took the children away from everything they knew, especially since they already believed all these negative things about their mom.
So the judge was stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out what would cause the least amount of damage.
Exactly. They were looking for the least harmful way forward, knowing that there was no perfect solution in this situation.
Yeah, for sure. Wow, we've covered a lot
We have.
with these three cases, and it really brings up a lot of important questions about how we deal with these really difficult family situations.
Definitely. It's a lot to take in.
Yeah, I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on how these cases connect to like the bigger picture of family law.
Okay.
But maybe we could get into that after a quick break.
Sounds good to me.
Welcome back, everyone. So before the break, we were talking about these three pretty intense child custody cases. And I'm really interested to hear kind of your expert take on how these cases fit into the bigger picture of family law.
Well, one of the biggest takeaways for me is how much weight is put on the parent's behavior. It's not just about saying, oh, that's bad, but really trying to understand how those actions affect the child.
Right, like in that Manitoba case with the dad and the mold, it wasn't just about the mold itself, but how his behavior around that was affecting the whole family.
Exactly. Judges are always looking at whether a parent can and is willing to put the child's needs first. And that can get really tricky, especially in these high conflict situations where everyone's emotions are running high.
Oh, absolutely. And in all three of these cases, there were allegations of some kind of abuse, physical, emotional, verbal. So how do judges sift through all of that and figure out what really happened?
It's almost like you're trying to put together a puzzle where you don't have all the pieces. They're looking for patterns and evidence that supports the claims and trying to figure out if each parent is telling the truth. It's not an easy process at all.
Sounds like judges have to be part detective, part therapist, and part legal expert all at the same time.
Uh-huh.
Huh.
Yeah, I guess you could say that. And it's important to remember that the standard of proof in these cases is the balance of probabilities.
Oh,
Meaning, is it more likely than not that something happened? It's not like beyond a reasonable doubt, which is used in criminal cases.
right. That makes sense. So it's about weighing everything and making the best decision you can, even if it's not perfectly clear.
Yeah, and in that New Brunswick case, the judge said that they understood how serious that allegation from the mother was about the sexual favors. But ultimately, they decided in favor of the father.
Right.
And I think that shows that while those kinds of allegations are taken seriously, they have to be looked at alongside all the other factors in the case.
Yeah, and it seems like having stability was a big factor in all three of these cases.
Yeah.
The judges kept talking about routine and consistent care and making sure the kids had a supportive environment. It's like they're trying to create a safe space in the middle of all the chaos of a divorce.
Absolutely. Kids need predictability, especially when everything else feels like it's changing. Having that stable home life can give them that sense of security and normalcy that they really need. And judges definitely prioritize that.
But what about that Ontario case with the parental alienation? The judge said that the father was doing some really harmful things, but the younger kids still stayed in his care. How does that fit with the idea of stability and doing what's best for the kids?
That case is a perfect example of how tough these decisions can be for judges when it comes to alienation. On one hand, you have clear evidence that one parent is trying to manipulate the child against the other.
Right.
But on the other hand, you have to think about the trauma those kids might experience if they're suddenly taken away from everything they know,
Mm.
especially if they already have these strong negative beliefs about the other parent.
So the judge was basically in a no-win situation, trying to choose the least harmful option.
Exactly. And in this case, the judge felt that keeping things as they were while adding some safeguards was the least damaging way to move forward.
Okay, what kind of safeguards are we talking about?
Well, in that case, the judge put some specific conditions on the father. They limited his ability to make certain decisions about the kids.
Oh, okay.
They ordered counseling for both him and the children, and he had to give regular updates to the mother.
So the kid stayed with him, but the judge was trying to stop him from doing more harm and hopefully create a way for him and the mom to eventually have a better relationship.
Yeah, that's the hope. But it's usually a long and difficult road,
Right.
and it just shows that there's no quick fix for parental alienation.
Yeah. All these cases also bring up some interesting points about the laws around child custody.
For sure.
It seems like the big idea is the best interests of the child, but what does that actually mean in real life?
It's important to remember that best interest is not a set thing. It changes as the child grows and as things change in their life and as new information comes out. Judges aren't trying to find the perfect parent. They're trying to figure out the best arrangement for that specific child at that specific time.
So it's not about punishing a parent for their past mistakes or giving them a reward for being good.
Right.
It's about coming up with a plan that truly helps the child.
Exactly. And that means looking at a lot of different factors. We've talked about stability and how the parents act.
Yeah.
But judges also think about things like, can each parent provide for the child's basic needs? Are they emotionally available? Are they willing to support a healthy relationship between the child and the other parent? All of that goes into figuring out what's truly in the child's best interests.
And in that New Brunswick case, the judge mentioned that the twins had a really close bond with their dad's side of the family.
Yeah.
Does that mean that relationships with extended family can also play a part in custody decisions?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Judges recognize that kids are part of a whole network of relationships. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, siblings, all those connections can be so important for a child's sense of belonging and stability.
Yeah.
So the relationship between the parent and child is the most important, but the whole family picture is definitely considered.
It sounds like judges have an incredibly tough job.
It is.
They have to make these huge, life-changing decisions with only part of the information, and everyone is telling different stories and emotions are running high.
It's a big responsibility for
Yeah.
sure. These cases are just a small glimpse into how complex their work is.
Right.
You have to sort through all the legal stuff, evaluate what the witnesses say, and try to figure out what's truly best for the child. And on top of that, the system itself isn't always set up to handle things like parental alienation or the long-term effects of childhood trauma.
Yeah, it's clear that the legal system has its limits.
It does.
It can provide some guidelines for making these decisions, but it can't force a parent to change or magically fix a broken family.
That's a really important point. The real work happens outside of the courtroom, in the daily interactions between parents and children. The law can step in and set boundaries and create some space for healing, but at the end of the day, it's up to the people involved to put the child's well-being first and try to rebuild trust and healthy relationships.
So we've talked about a lot how parents act, the importance of stability,
Yeah.
the legal system, the complexities of alienation, and it's safe to say that these cases are much more than meets the eye.
Definitely. And that's exactly why these deep talks are so important. We get to really unpack these issues and understand them better.
Before we wrap up, is there one thought-provoking question that you'd leave our listener with? Something to really think about as they learn more about these topics.
Here's something to consider. If we truly believe that what's best for the child is the most important thing, what changes do we need to make in the legal system, in mental health services, or even in how we think about these issues as a society to better protect children from the damage caused by parental alienation and high-conflict separations?
Wow, that's a really powerful question.
It is.
And it's one we need to be paying attention to. We need to be thinking about how we can support families going through these crises, how we can give professionals the right tools to help, and how we can create a culture that really puts children's emotional well-being first. It's complicated, but it's definitely something we can't ignore.
I agree.
You know, it feels like we've only just scratched the surface of this whole thing.
Yeah.
These cases, they really show that family law, it's not just about the legal stuff and the fighting in court.
It's so much more than that. It's about, real human emotions and relationships and the impact that trauma can have.
Yeah, For sure. And it makes you realize that we need to move past these simple ideas of like the good parent versus the bad parent.
Totally. Let's be real. Most parents aren't all good or all bad. They're somewhere in between.
Right.
They're trying their best, but they're human. They mess up. Sometimes they're carrying around stuff from their own past, and sometimes they just don't know how to handle the stress of a separation or divorce.
It's like there's no instruction manual for parenting.
Exactly.
And then you add in a custody battle, and it's like, whoa, things get really complicated.
Yeah, for sure. And what's important is to remember that even parents with good intentions can accidentally hurt their kids, especially when they're in these high conflict situations or they're doing things that alienate the other parent.
And that's where it seems like having support and early intervention could make a huge difference.
Huge.
Like imagine if the parents in these cases had resources to help them understand how conflict works and the dangers of alienation and how to co-parent in a healthy way.
It's about changing the focus. You know, instead of trying to win, it's about working together and putting the child first. And that's where therapy can be so helpful. It
Right.
can give parents the skills to communicate better and manage their emotions and really understand what their child needs.
And those interventions can help the kids too.
Oh, absolutely.
Like think about the children in these cases.
Yeah,
They've seen all this conflict, this manipulation, maybe even abuse.
it's
They need help to deal with all of that and to start healing.
definitely. Therapy that's specifically for kids who've been through alienation is so important.
Yeah.
It helps them feel heard and understand that it's not their fault. And it gives them the power to have good relationships with both parents without feeling like they have to pick sides.
And it helps them to think critically, you know, so they can start to question what they've been told
Yeah.
and form their own opinions based on their own experiences.
Exactly. And let's not forget about extended family and friends and support from the community. These cases often involve a lot of isolation for the parent who's being rejected and for the kids.
Right.
Having a network of safe and supportive adults around them can make a world of difference.
It really takes a village to raise a child,
It does.
especially when they're going through these tough family situations.
And to build that village, we need awareness and education and a commitment to stopping alienation from happening. It's about realizing that alienation, it hurts more than just the parent who's being pushed away. It affects the child's whole world, their sense of self, their relationships, their future.
It's a lot to think about, but it's something we need to be talking about. So as we finish up this deep dive into these really complicated and often heartbreaking cases, what's the one thing you hope our listeners will take away from all of this?
I hope they come away with a better understanding of just how complex these child custody disputes are and the impact that a parent's behavior can have on a child, and how important it is to intervene early, provide support, and make changes to the system to better protect kids who are caught in these situations.
That's a great takeaway. We've covered so much today, and these are topics that we all need to keep learning about.
Absolutely.
So thank you all for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll be back soon with another interesting topic and a whole new set of sources. Until then, keep those brains working.